So welcome back to another episode of This Week. The last video we discussed an introductory to Deviance and all the various aspects of it and how there's just so much to it. What I forgot to mention is that you can just study Deviance for a living in criminology or in just criminal justice and things like that. For those of you who are interested in being police officers, you're kind of doing that, but you're kind of enforcing things, so a little bit differently. Also talks about criminology, and that's the definition of deviance right there up on the board. So with today's material, we are going to be discussing the biological side of deviance, since there's a history of deviance and how our thoughts have kind of evolved, so to speak, over time as to why people do what they do, why are people committing crime. So we're going to first examine the biological side, and then we're going to move on into our more formal theories that we kind of know in sociology, so the sociological aspect of it. In examining deviance from the biological side, there's really, you have to kind of think about the history of how society viewed people that were either committing crime or just seeing people as different. So how are deviants different from the rest of the people who are obeying the laws and just totally, absolutely fine, right? And this kind of thought, the main guy in the picture here is that Cesare Lombroso. He's a French guy from about the 1830s to the turn of the 20th century. So this is kind of the era that we're kind of examining. And back in the day, and you kind of see this in movies and books and such, it used to be that they thought that you had a demon inside of you, and that's why you were causing different acts or uproars or just being weird, because you had this thing inside of you that had to be exorcised, or you just had to be put out of sight, out of mind. You kind of hear about the old lady up in the attic, and don't talk to her or whatever, she's crazy. That's demonology, thinking about there's a demon inside of her. In addition to, and thinking about just that deviants are different from other people, is this movement or this series of thought called atavism. This is what Lombroso is known for, and it's basically an evolutionary throwback. So these people just did not develop or evolve over time. They're just kind of stuck in a primitive matter, and this is how primitive people are. So they're deviant, and we shouldn't really do anything with them because they're seen as lesser. So this was very influenced, as you can kind of tell, by Darwin and social evolution. And so that's kind of what atavism was. There's also a medical model of deviance, where deviance was just seen as an illness or a sickness, and you see that a lot too in older movies depicting olden times, where you just have this crazy lady or the people who are committing different acts or whatever, they're ill, they're sick, that kind of thing. It used to be too that thinking about how deviants are different, you had different aspects of trying to figure out exactly what character traits of people were deviant. So if you had X, Y, and Z, you were classified as deviant. So this is where one of the aspects of phrenology, which is a pseudoscience now, pseudo meaning fake science. But back in the day, what phrenology was is that just by feeling the bumps, the different bumps on your head, and depending on where they were, that's what this picture is up here, just by feeling the different bumps on your head, that classified your personality. And so just because you have a little bump on your head over here or something, that means that you're a criminal. Which like today, that wouldn't fly, right? We need science, we need evidence and such. But back then it was like, oh, no, that makes sense. They're a criminal, so, and they have a bump right here, and this person also has kind of a bump in a similar area. So that was one aspect of it. And even in examining different people's body structures, so how your body is shaped, if you're and this kind of goes in a little bit more of the psychology aspect as well, but if you are fat or rounder, that was kind of seen as you were living in luxury, or you had a lot of consumption, so you weren't really as likely to commit crimes just because you were a little bit more on the obese side. And then, however, if you were pretty skinny or gangly looking, this was kind of associated with being cunning or stealthy. So you had to be aware of people who were a little bit skinnier because they can like move around and be super quick. Similar thing with people who were a little bit larger but stronger with muscles. These people are active, so therefore they're dynamic, they're assertive, they're forceful. So you better be on your guard about these people because they look like they can do some harm. So thinking about how people, even just people's body shapes even, are examining that. So that's one aspect of seeing things biologically. And then with this perspective in particular, it's a little bit different because it's focusing on the actor themselves, who is deviant, right? It's not focusing on the act. And another approach to the biological era, so there's different camps of the biological era, kind of similar to the different camps in sociology, but another camp is that people were just born that way, so it's kind of in their DNA. Kind of similar to adaptivism, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a throwback. And these experts, if they're trying to figure out how to make them well again, since treatment was kind of the big thing for them, the experts determine when the person is better, which obviously is very subjective. And we can kind of see the biological model a little bit in our media. There's that classic debate as to whether or not video games cause aggression in people. And a few of you guys are doing that study for your research project. That's a very common one. Check out the work of Dr. Whitney DeCamp over at Western Michigan and his work on do video games cause violence. Spoiler alert, no, they don't. But that's something that the media loves to drive up, especially if there's been like a school shooting or something like that, or mass murder or whatever. Do video games cause violence or aggression? Similarly, media likes to think that music also causes deviance, and a few of you are also doing this topic for your research project, where does the music that we listen to influence our actions or just even our thoughts? And I'll leave it, I haven't delved too deeply into that, but you can kind of see how the socialization of that might lead you to think about devious things, but not necessarily act on them. It's kind of similar to the video where they redid the shocking experiment with Vsauce and how, the opportunity was there to shock people, and some people did in retribution, but other people just continued onward with their work because they were just like, well, even though the situation is prime for it, you don't necessarily have to do it. So there's a little bit of a nuance there. And something that both the media studies as well as just this biological approach in general, it's a kind of a weakness for, is it ignores that socially constructed nature of what is criminal, right? And who determines that criminality? They just assume, oh, it's criminal, but they don't take into effect like, okay, what exactly is criminal? How has society developed over time into seeing what is and what isn't? And how can people change and that sort of thing. There's not any really variations in your ability to adapt to different situations. So kind of thinking about the media example, for example, you're able to adapt, right? You know that this is a video game and that shooting people is wrong. So when you're out in real life, are you really going to kind of assume your gaming identity because of that situation? So you're able to adapt, which this theory doesn't necessarily talk about. It also removes the possibility, the biological approach does, regarding free will and accountability, because deviants are seen as different and it's in your DNA. There's a whole entire other camp that I forgot to mention in this slide that talks about what's known as trait theories. That examines it's more of a psychology area, so that's why I'm not really going into too much detail since we talk about a lot about psychology later. But it talks about how Even just the neuro aspects can lead to deviance, and abnormalities in your brain, that kind of thing, your neurons. Thinking about the reaction of brain function in response to certain stimuli. So think about your sensation seekers. So you hear about people who are like climbing up skyscrapers and things like that. So the explanation for that one, if you were wondering, is because of the different chemicals in your brain that releases when you're doing that. So that's called arousal theory, because you're aroused, you find a thrill. That's kind of the thrill-seeking aspect of it, is because it's in your brain. So it's more of a psychological and biological approach to that one. And I'll see my notes here. And then some other theorists also suggest that it's in your genes, and that your personality traits might be genetically determined, but not many people are examining that too much anymore. But this is especially studied with twins, because you can kind of see if it's the same DNA. Kind of back to that whole nature versus nurture kind of aspect. But I thought I would throw those out there for my psychology people, just because of that sociobiology and the psychology aspect of it is super fascinating. I'm going to throw that away. Sorry for my biological people, but this is sociology. So we're going to go ahead and talk about how functionalists in particular see deviance. We're going to go ahead with functionalists first. And Durkheim, our first sociological study regarding suicide, that guy, he's been popping up again and again and again, must be important. He's back with his thoughts on crime. And he has this lovely thought, I guess, for lack of a better word, that even if we were living in a society of saints, so if everybody was a saint, crime, believe it or not, would still occur. Because he believes that crime is a function of human nature. He says that deviance is necessary. It's bound up with the fundamental conditions of all social life, and by that very fact, it is useful. So no matter what society that we're living with, or no matter how good we can be, we will still make something illegal. And then on the flip side too, we will still make something punishable as well. And which is just super fascinating, because thinking about it from a functionalist perspective, this is saying that you need crime, which is something that you hear about the media. We need to reduce crime, we need to eliminate it, all that kind of thing. However, from a functionalist point of view, we actually need it in order to for society to kind of continue going on, just because it's part of our human nature. It's just naturally occurring. So this inevitability of crime is linked to the differences within our society. So you can see in different neighborhoods, different sizes of cities, different nations, that we all have different crime that we're experiencing. The US in particular has a higher incarceration rate, which we'll kind of examine later onward, but and different countries also have their own views of punishment or just crime in general. You'll notice that over in Europe, for instance, they have a vastly different criminal justice system than we do, and their times in prison, for one thing, are way shorter. They do a lot more community service and things like that. And regarding crime in particular, crime is a social phenomenon because of this universal aspect. It's all present in society, and it's also needed. And this kind of makes it become normal in a way, which, again, for those of you who might not be experienced in sociology, which is many of you, this might be a little bit of a hard thing to grasp, right? And so basically, why do we need deviance and why do we need crime, right? Because it has its benefits. One of the ways is that crime paves the way for social change. Crime demonstrates that there's not a rigidness to it, or that the social structure is not flexible. And so there's a little bit of a move here, and that way movements can occur, or things can actually change for the better. So classic example, civil rights movement, right? While they were trying to do boycotts and things like that, that's still deviance, right? Boycotting something is a full act of deviance. It's not necessarily illegal, not necessarily a crime, so to speak, but it does demonstrate that there are things that society needs to do in order to create better social change. Socrates, for example, his thoughts and things like that, and other classic philosophers weren't really seen as, what that time really thought about. And so thinking about how even just their viewpoints and things like that led to different types of thinking, as well as different types of social change. So again, calling attention to these different social ills. In addition to thinking about how deviance kind of contributes to the social order of things, it sets different boundaries. These boundaries can be changed, as kind of demonstrated here. There's this group solidarity. You can kind of form an us versus them kind of thinking that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. We can kind of see this with the different movements that have occurred with Black Lives Matter, just the George Floyd protests that have occurred over the last year, and just the protests that have been occurring basically since the beginning of all of it. And there's this kind of unification process that's occurring as well, that even though some of these protests get pretty violent, they're still kind of magnifying that there is something that needs to be done, right? It's being more and more talked about in media, just more and more talked about in the world, because of this little indication that our social structure isn't rigid. So we need to advocate for social change, and it also aids in adaptation as well. So having the innovative function. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes. So that's kind of one aspect of Durkheim. He has a lot more, but I really enjoy thinking about that. If we were to live in a society of saints, that according to Durkheim, crime is still going to be occurring. You may or may not agree with that, but that's just how Durkheim sees crime. And in addition to thinking about Durkheim, we have our concept of anomie that pops up again, right? Anomie being that state of normlessness that usually occurs because of different social changes and disorder, that loss of direction. I kind of keep on bringing up it again and again and again, and some of you guys do as well, thinking about COVID and how that sense of loss of, all of a sudden we're kind of in our homes all the time. For those of us who are remote working, or even if those of us are essential workers, there was a drastic change in intensity of that. And so there was a little bit of a loss that's going on there. And so that's kind of a big key in Durkheim's view of crime as well, is that if you're experiencing this sense of loss and feeling of disorder in society, you're more apt to kind of commit crime just because you don't know what to do. You're more apt to turn to crime. Like, say, for instance, if you lost your job, which we'll kind of examine in the next slides from now. But how exactly do you kind of cope with that? How are you going to make money? That kind of thing. If you're kind of lost, what are you going to do? And then just as an aside as well, Durkheim also believed that the punishments of a society help define acceptable behavior. So, and we'll kind of examine this a little bit more when we talk about social control and how social control has changed over the years, which is super fascinating. I could talk about it all day. But thinking how different, and this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier regarding the US versus Europe, for instance. Our punishment systems, either community service, prison, whatever it might be, bailing people out or just paying a fine, that also kind of defines acceptable behavior. And there's a lot of different theories regarding just punishment in itself. So I really strongly encourage you guys to take a criminology class, because I'm just dying here and I just want to go into it. And if you want to, I can. Let me know if you want to rant about any of these topics, and I'll definitely just go off the wall and make a video about it. But So depending on like if punishments are swift, certain, and severe, that'll negate crime. If punishments are visible, there's a theory that that'll negate crime. So there's a lot of different ways that society and how they punish people can also help not only reduce crime, but also define what is acceptable and what is not. So that kind of, what's it called? Enforcement of norms or laws. And then thinking about anomie in the sense of normlessness, this is kind of the one of the key ways or one of the key concepts of this chapter. And this is Robert Merton's theory of anomie. So basically, remember in research, what you can do is you can take a theory and you can actually kind of adapt it depending on what exactly you're examining. So with Robert Merton's case, he did a little bit of a modification in order to fit anomie specifically within the US and the US's kind of culture of crime, so to speak. And so basically he's arguing in his theory is that there's two elements that are going on in order to produce this possible sense of normlessness. And these two ways are the culturally defined goals that society has us do. So for instance, most of you are in college probably to get a better job. That's a goal that you guys have, right? You want to create a better future for yourself. So that's one kind of access of it. And then the other access is the socially approved ways for obtaining them. So all of you guys, because you're in college, and whatever goal you might want to have with creating a better life for yourself, you're doing that goal in a socially approved way because college is seen as a good way to obtain that goal of getting a better job. And Merton examined why we accept or reject these goals in addition to how exactly we obtain them. So, and I'll kind of go through an example of this because this is the key. Basically, if there's anything in this lecture series, this is it. This is on your final as part of the final exam. Just wanted to let you guys know about that. So kudos to watching these. So basically, there are various ways of adapting based on those two accesses. So you have your means to achieve the goals as well as your goals. So what are your goals is kind of one-on-one aspect, which you can kind of see right here. So here are your goals, as well as how to achieve them. And like I was saying before, you can either accept or reject how to both how to achieve the goals and the goals themselves. So this is kind of what Merton's theory is examining. And so what happens is if you both accept how to accept the goal, it's kind of weird because the goals are on the left side. I'm used to reading up and down. But anyway, if you accept the goal, so if you accept the goal of getting a better job, and you accept the means to achieve the goals via education, for example, you would be something that's called a conformist. We'll kind of get into conformity a little bit more formally later on, but for Merton's point of view, this is the most common in a stable society because this is just what people are going along with, right? This is how life is. You know, if I want to earn money, I gotta go to college, I gotta go get a better degree, I gotta go apply for jobs, that kind of thing. So that is part one of figuring out social adaptation. The second one is if you reject the way to, say, earn money. So if earn money is our goal, one of the socially acceptable ways to do that is to get a job or to go through college and get a degree, right? But if you accept the goal of getting money, but you don't want to go through the traditional way of doing it, that's what's called an innovator. So this is where criminal behavior is starting to become more and more apparent because you're kind of achieving these goals, but in a roundabout way. So this is kind of where your drug dealing might occur, right? You're still earning money. It's not acceptable socially within our society, but you're still earning money. And In addition to, it's just typically just not the way that you might typically go there. Stealing from a bank too. That's kind of innovation. That's kind of why it's called you're an innovation. You're an innovator because you think of new ideas to kind of get things. So basically, if you're going along with a goal, but you don't really want to go with what traditional society is saying, you're going to be an innovator. And this is just another way of seeing things. I'm trying to visualize it for my visual people. So, and if you reject the goal, so if you kind of go back and be like, no, I don't want to earn money, but I do have the means to do that. That's what's called a ritualist. So you have the tools to achieve these different types of goals, but you actually just don't want to. So you might have the ability to go to college, for instance, but you don't really want to do it. You're still participating in the system because you're kind of accepting the means of society right there, but you don't really want to participate, so to speak. So if you're in a job and you're just accepting things willy-nilly just because, meh, you don't care, you're kind of checked out. These are the people who have kind of checked out. They're just kind of going through the motions. That's a ritualist. It's a little bit hard to understand since they're kind of difficult to see in society. We don't really talk about them much. And then your retreatist rejects everything. So if you don't accept the means of achieving a goal, and you don't even accept the goal in itself, you're just within society, you're just kind of a retreatist, and you're just kind of piecing out and backing up. So extreme example of this would be like you just go and live in the mountains by yourself. That would be an example of a retreatist. So, but in thinking about it, in criminal aspects, drug addicts and vagrants are usually portrayed as retreatists. You kind of think about it with your drugs, you're retreating from our society into whatever high the drug is putting you on. So they're kind of retreating that way. You can also physically retreat too. The people who just automatically, all of a sudden disappear because they're not able to maybe be with their family or something like that, and they've rejected the ways to provide for their family or just even live in the society, and they kind of just go out of nowhere. That would be an example there. Then finally, the kind of the fifth person is a rebel. And so what happens if you don't really like the means? You revolt sometimes. And these people might be reacting against corrupt and hatred government or something like that. Or they just want to create some type of alternative in a new system. So instead of accepting the means, accepting the goals, they go ahead and create their own. They're just like, no, we ain't doing that. We're going to go over here. We're going to kind of just create our own means, create our own goals. You can really see this within government, right? We have different revolutions, we have different rebels, right? Kind of that thinking. So I'm thinking about, like, say, the American Revolution, it was deviant to be like, no, we're going to go ahead and revolt against what England's power has over us. We're going to revolt against the taxes, for instance. We're going to throw our tea into the harbor, right? And we're going to kind of create our new system of America. So that can be kind of seen as an adaptation of society in a kind of a big picture. Because this can be used for big picture things like whole entire countries, or it can just be used as individual people too. Usually it's very micro since we're examining how exactly groups of people, so like drug addicts or just normal people, like hopefully you and I are conformists, but you can use it as a big picture as well. Alrighty, and we're going to end it there for this video. So kind of to recap, in this video we talked about some biological and some psychological perspectives, thinking about the evolutionary throwbacks, for instance, and demonology, and how some people think that it's kind of within us that we're deviant. Some psych perspectives, thinking about how the mind is constructed, kind of that neurobiology approach. In addition to thinking about, I didn't mention this in the lecture, but thinking about classical conditioning and operant conditioning and social learning theory too with Bandura for your psych peeps out there. Those can also have an effect on your ability to do crime or your want to do crime. Then moved into the sociology aspect of crime, examining the functionalist perspective in this video, thinking about Durkheim's Society of Saints and how even if we were to live in a society of saints, crime would still occur because it's needed for a society function. And Deviance can point out the flaws in society and see how the different things that we might have in order to make society better or to change it. That's kind of one major aspect that functionalists see crime for. We also talked about Merton's adaptation theory regarding anomie. This is kind of the key thing with this chapter is Merton's theory. It is a question on your final written portion, so just kind of be wary of that. But and for that final, for those of you guys who are watching as a reward, you'll basically have to come up with your own examples, not necessarily the one that I did with education and getting a job, but you kind of have to come up with your own examples for each of these adaptations. So with your conformist, remember there's two accesses, the goal that society wants you to do and then how to achieve that goal. So the conformist, you're accepting both. You're like, okay, this is a socially acceptable way to achieve the goal, so you go along with it. Innovator, you accept that goal, but you don't accept the means that to get that goal. So you kind of do a roundabout way, or you invent your own way. Innovator, you invent your own way of doing things. The ritualist person, they reject that goal and they're just like, okay, yeah, fine, I accept the means of it. They're kind of just doing things in a ritual. So it's just kind of over and over and over again. And then a retreatist is kind of a person who, this is really the person who checks out. I know I said like ritualist is a person who checks out, but ritualist is more like they check out mentally. They're just like doing the motions. But with a retreatist, they actually kind of withdraw from society. So it could be like for high school dropouts, for instance, they retreat, they drop out from education. They don't, they kind of reject the goal of getting a high school education and they reject the means of getting it by dropping out of high school. They could, however, become an innovator, and while they do, well, maybe not. That gets complicated because you could become an innovator and accept it and get your GED, but that gets a little hairy and confusing. But anyway, so a retreatist just basically rejects both of them. And then the rebel would kind of be the person who revolts and creates their new goal. They don't really want to go with society's goal. They want to create a new one. And one example of this would be like terrorism too. They rebel against things. They don't accept the goal that perhaps a country has, or even just, or you think of like the Unabomber or something like that. They don't accept the goal that's going on within society. So their new way of creating a goal is to be blowing everyone up or killing people. That's a little bit of a rebel there. So that's a quick review of this video. Hopefully you're enjoying this topic so far. And in the next one, we're going to be examining the conflict and interactionist theories, I believe. So I'll see you next time.